Kia ora tātou, and announcing that we start this afternoon's hearing, if you can hear me, with the submission of the Isaac Conservation and Wildlife Trust. And who's going to speak first?
I'll bring the rest of my team to the table at the same time, if that's all right.
Thank you.
So my name is Kim Seaton. I provided the planning evidence on behalf of the Trust. With me on my right is Ms. Shelley McMurtry, who provided the aquatic ecology evidence. Sitting behind me, we still have Ms. Anita Spencer, who gave evidence on behalf of DOC this morning, but whom you've helpfully given us permission for her to remain here if there's any questions that follow through on the mudfish issue. And I've also have with me Mr. Bruce Raw, who's the operations manager for the Trust, just in case you happen to have any questions that we can't answer.
He was who signed the original submission.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Ms. McTrucci and I have both prepared a brief summary of our evidence. I don't know, do you want me to go through that? It's really just the highlights of what we have already put in our evidence. Is that helpful to you, or we can go straight to questions? I'm in your hands.
No, I don't think I've seen your summary. And I'm sorry, the sound seems to be rather dodgy this afternoon. But if you've prepared a summary, then we would like to respect that and ask you to present it.
Okay, thank you. It's very brief. I'll let Ms. Murtry start then, and I'll perhaps wrap up once she's finished.
Thank you, Kim. So as per my primary evidence dated the 17th of July of this year, I was commissioned by the Isaac Conservation and Wildlife Trust to determine the salmon spawning habitat suitability of some of the smaller headwater streams on their property. Now this was namely Stillwater Creek, North Boundary Stream and Middle Stream. This was done by undertaking a salmon spawning habitat suitability survey in May and a literature review of past ecological surveys in the area, and this was all presented in my primary evidence. So the methodology and findings of that evidence were then discussed at expert conferencing with myself and Jared Arthur from Environment Canterbury, where there was an agreement with the methodology, approach and subsequent classification of salmon spawning habitat. As stated in that joint witness statement, which was dated the 20th of August, it was agreed that the final classification of salmon spawning habitat in the surveyed waterways was as per figure 13 of my primary evidence, which showed around about 232 metres of the downstream reaches of Stillwater Creek as salmon spawning habitat. It was also agreed in that joint witness statement that any attempts to improve salmon spawning habitat of those small headwater streams could be hindered by wider issues caused by reduced base flows of those spring-fed systems. A subsequent survey of a small headwater stream called Stockbank Creek to the north of the Trust property was accidentally omitted from the first surveys. So when this discovery was made, we undertook a survey on the 17th of September following the same methodology as presented in the primary evidence and joint witness statement. And the findings from that was presented in my supplementary evidence dated 18th of September, which showed that there was no salmon spawning habitat found in the surveyed sections of Stockbank Creek. Finally, my rebuttal evidence dated 18th of September responded to Emily Arthur Moore of the North Canterbury Fish and Game submission dated the 17th of July. And my rebuttal evidence really pertained to what I consider to currently be salmon spawning habitat within the waterways surveyed on the Trust's land, the findings as I've summarised above. Figure 3 of that rebuttal evidence provided a final combined map showing the proposed Schedule 17 salmon spawning habitat on the Trust's land, overlaid with sections agreed to not be salmon spawning habitat as per my primary evidence and the joint witness statement, as well as the surveyed section of Stockbank Creek that I also consider to not be salmon spawning habitat based on the supplementary evidence. This Figure 3 also shows that, therefore, the only salmon spawning habitat identified in the waterways that we surveyed was limited to the downstream 323 metre section of Stillwater Creek. Sections of the Otakaikino main stem and Plantation Creek were not surveyed and remain as shown in Schedule 17. Thank you.
Well, what a good idea it was of yours to give us a summary, because there were different bits of document and you've brought it all together very clearly for us. Thank you very much. Let me see if my colleagues have questions for you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No, Chair.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions of clarification, but just like to thank you for the diligence with which you and Mr. Arthur have got your heads together and resolved this issue for us. So thank you very much for doing that to both of you.
Thank you.
That's easy then, thank you for that. In terms of my summary, I don't really have much to add to the salmon spawning issue. In fact, I don't have anything to add to the salmon spawning issue beyond what Ms McMurtry has said. The only thing I'd note is we haven't received a formal response from ECAN yet confirming whether they agree to the omission or deletion, I should say, of the Stopbank Creek section. There's been informal conversations between Ms McMurtry and Mr Arthur, but I'm assuming that will come in reply if we haven't had it yet. In terms of the mudfish habitat, as I said, you've already heard from Ms Spencer this morning, being that the Trust has mudfish ponds within its property that are both artificial and actively managed. The Trust, and I've noted this in my primary evidence, acknowledges the potential benefits of classifying the ponds as critical habitat of threatened indigenous freshwater species. And initially when we put the submission in, the thought was that we didn't want it classified, the Trust didn't want it classified, it was going to cause more problems than it would solve by having it classified. We reflected further on that position after reading the Section 42A report and the potential benefits, particularly around consideration for groundwater takes from third parties. But really what it boiled down to was the changes that are proposed to be made to Policy 4.101, and that's around avoidance of loss and degradation of habitat, really would make obtaining any resource consent for active management quite problematic, potentially, particularly if they needed to dig out the habitat or even if they needed to move it altogether, which has happened in the past. And so for that reason, our preference remains to delete the Trust mudfish habitat from the planning maps, and I understand that the Department of Conservation is in support of that now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think that there's anything further that we need to trouble you with at the moment. Do you have any further question, Commissioner Solomon?
No, I don't.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, you've already expressed our satisfaction.
Yeah, no further questions. It's very good, thank you.
All right, easy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming in and summarising the position for us.
Thank you for your time.
So the next submission that we were to hear this afternoon, I summarise in my mind as egg and poultry. The Egg Producers Federation and the Poultry Industry Association. Are they represented now?
Yes, they're here, and we've got Michael Brooks opening.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming in.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
You're going to speak first, are you, Mr. Brooks?
Yes, I'll just give a brief overview of the industry and the importance of it in the area.
Thank you very much.
So I am the Executive Director of the Egg Producers Federation and the Poultry Industry Association of New Zealand. And poultry meat is chicken, turkey, duck, and in the Canterbury region that is very much chicken and turkey. And we represent 98% of the industry in New Zealand. The Egg Producers Federation, we represent 100% of commercial egg farmers throughout New Zealand. Set out in Clause 3, the size of the industry in New Zealand, as you'll note. The turkey industry, while small, it's all centred in the area covered under the Canterbury Regional Council. And there is a number of meat chicken operations allied with the companies Teagle and Brinks, rearing and hatchery operations. So in my estimation, it's probably around 17 to 18% of the national poultry industry, eggs and meat. So as you can see, for an area, an important part of the national industry. Consumption, we are in this country big eaters of eggs, eating about 246 eggs per person per year, and chicken meat is the number one protein source, has been since 2001. So we eat an extraordinary amount, really, 44 kilograms of chicken and 45.7 kilograms of poultry meat, so chicken, turkey and duck. A couple of things that I think are important, just the market factors. So you're seeing a rise in consumer demand for free-range meat chicken. So that's seeing a move certainly to the free-range operations, and that has implications, of course, with the ranges for environmental issues, and also with cages. So the old-style current cages, sometimes referred to as battery cages, in New Zealand, they all have to be gone by the end of 2022. The replacement options are free-range barn, which is a shed with which the birds don't have access to the outdoors, but either have an aviary or a floor raising system, or a colony cage system. So that's a larger cage with nesting and perching. But the two supermarket chains have made a policy position that as from 2025-26, they will no longer accept eggs from colonies. So that's leading very much to a scenario where eggs in this country will be raised primarily either in barn or free range. I've set out in Clause 5 just a definition of what those systems mean, and then I'm happy to answer any questions on that. And then in Clause 6, just the environmental scenarios. Certainly meat chicken farms in this country are completely computer controlled. So everything in terms of the environment, food, water, airflow, etc., is all computer controlled. Waste in meat chicken sheds, so that's wood chips, which is the flooring. That is a popular source of fertiliser for pasture, for pastoral farming, and also for horticulture. Mushroom farms are also keen to use that as well. And so you have that control for large-scale layer farms, and by that I mean sheds where there are 5,000 birds or more, free-range barn or cage, will have movable belts so that all the waste material is removed generally on a daily basis, dried, etc. And it's also popular as a fertiliser source. So look, that's just a very brief but summary of the industry, and RMA issues are an important part of the industry perspective. So we make a number of submissions on regional plans throughout the country. Happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. It's very good to be reminded after our lunch break of the attractive food that you're representing for us. Commissioner Solomon, are there any questions you wish to ask of Mr Brooks?
I have no questions for Mr Brooks.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions either, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Brooks. So now do we have Ms McConnell, is that right?
Yes, Chairman Shepherd. My name is Mary McConnell and I am presenting planning evidence to support Michael Brooks' statement.
And we have a statement of your evidence and a supplementary statement.
Yes,
And
Chairman.
we've had the opportunity to read those, so you don't need to read them to us. But if you want to give us a summary in the same way, of course, we'd be happy to receive that.
Thank you very much. I will proceed to give a summary of my statement and my supplementary statement of evidence. There are two matters I raised in our statement of evidence that I'd like to just reiterate today. One is the application of reasonable stock water use. And Plan Change 7 hasn't amended the wording to a significant degree. Simply in 5.111, a take from a water body needs to be for a reasonable domestic use and a person's reasonable stock water use. And our initial submission requested this was defined, and in the Section 42A report, the author very helpfully indicated that this was not a new phrase and that Environment Canterbury actually have the domestic and stock water taking and use information guide for people to refer to. So we've just looked at this, and this is really for our smaller farms, but we note that a smaller farm for reasonable use, so for their drinking purposes and then also for a stock water drinking purpose, are allowed to take 10 cubic metres of water per day as a permitted activity. But this water cannot be taken for other uses such as dairy shed washdown. And the small matter we'd just like to raise is that for a smaller farm, if they only take, say, 10 cubic metres of water for their stock water drinking, then, or 5 cubic metres of water for their stock water drinking, they do technically have another 5 cubic metres of water remaining, say, to wash down the chicken sheds, but they're not technically permitted to do that. So just wanted to raise the almost the going away from the effects-based approach, so to enable those smaller farms to still have that 10 cubic metres of water available to them for whatever they may choose, if their chickens only need to drink 5 cubic metres. The other matters we raised were to do with the use of overseer in assessing the nitrogen from farms. And we note that rules 8.5.23 and then also 14.5.16 require farms to demonstrate that they can produce data in the overseer function. However, option B, when more than 25% of the property is used to produce farm or rear an animal type that is not able to be selected in this option an overseer, the farm may not be able to meet the conditions of the rules. And we just wanted to highlight the fact that that poultry and egg farmers cannot use this method as well as, say, as dairy farms that were that the overseer model was designed for, and that in fact the overseer review panel has agreed that poultry farms are unfairly targeted with this application of overseer. And I raised the matter of the overseer whole model review that's been currently undertaken, and I would have liked to be able to provide this review to you now, but as I indicated in my supplementary evidence, unfortunately the review isn't completed yet. And if the hearing commissioners would allow, when this is completed, we would like to provide this to you.
Of course, we would like to accept that. And do you think that there's a prospect that it will be available by the beginning of December?
Yes, I have seen it in draft form, but was not permitted to. It wasn't permitted for public circulation.
No, I understand that. But if it might be available to you so that you could get it to us by the beginning of December, when we complete our hearings on PC7, then that would be a timely opportunity.
We will make sure this is circulated if it is available then. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions of Ms McConnell?
Yes, just I've gone through this actual original submission and your two briefs of evidence, and while you outline your concerns in general terms, I don't think you've provided us with any indication of the actual wording changes that you seek to the provisions that you've highlighted. Is that correct, or have I missed something?
That is correct. This same submission points were raised in the Plan Change 5 process, and they, in the Section 42 report, the overarching point was that we can't change overseer because the whole plan uses it. So changing it for Plan Change 7 isn't appropriate. And so our desire is to, well, it would have been to present this report, but unfortunately it's not able to. So to put forward this report as it is intending to provide advice to regional councils on how to apply overseer for poultry farms. So we haven't provided any wording ourselves as such because we feel it'd be more appropriate for this report that has been commissioned by Ministry of Primary Industries to do it for us.
Sure, I understand that. But in terms of the other issue you highlighted today about your concern about stock water use and washdown water, I don't think you provided any wording in that regard either.
No, just to include criteria to determine whether proposed water take is reasonable. However, Commissioner, if you would like, I would be, and I was permitted to, I'm more than happy to provide wording and provide it to the hearings coordinator.
Yeah, well, to help us understand the merits of what you're proposing, it's always very useful to see the actual wording changes that you'd like made to the plan. Otherwise, we kind of have to guess what they might be, and there's a good chance we'll guess wrong. So if you can provide the wording that you seek, then that would be very helpful.
Certainly, Commissioner.
That's all, Chair.
Commissioner Solomon, any questions?
Yes, I just have one small query, and it's regarding your paragraph 4.2 of your evidence in chief. Second bullet point, and really at the second sentence of the second bullet point, the uncertainty created by PC7 is likely to impose a significant cost to the poultry industry because the council has not developed or provided an appropriate standard for assessing nutrient loss. Do you think that it's just up to the council to provide an appropriate standard, or do you think the poultry industry has a responsibility too?
So the poultry industry, we're in discussions with Overseer Limited in terms of the options in terms of that. I guess like a lot of other things, COVID hasn't helped, but we're certainly in the middle of those discussions.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Well, Mr. Brooks, we're grateful to you for coming to present this submission today, and to Ms McConnell for answering our questions on the evidence that she's already provided. There are a couple of things that you're going to be able to help us with over the next few weeks, and we appreciate you doing that. And in particular, we'll be especially interested in the outcome of the review of the overseer. Thank you for coming in today. We appreciate the assistance.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners.
Thank you.
Now, I think we come to 12th Night Consulting.
Yes, that's correct. We've got Mr. Tipper here.
Mr. Tipper, you're standing in for Mr. English, is that right?
That's correct, Chairman. Yes. Afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Thanks very much for your time.
You have seen what Mr. English put in, have you?
I have, Chairman, yes. I've read Mr. English's submission, and I've prepared a statement of my own to help support some of his submission, focusing primarily on coal tar. Have you had a chance to read my statement?
Just a moment, let's see. I've certainly had Mr. English's one. I don't think I've had yours.
Oh, okay. Would it help the Commissioners if I read my statement to you?
Yes, I think that would be appropriate, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Okay, certainly. Now, but before I start with that, two things. Firstly, apologies, my appearance here is very much a last minute change to scheduling. Mr. English can't appear to speak for himself. I haven't actually met Mr. English, but he and I, as it turns out, after a few emails and phone conversations, share an interest in this particular topic of managing coal tar. So he has asked, and I've accepted to come and represent him today. And the other thing is, I've written a statement, but whilst Mr. English in his evidence talks to his qualifications, his background in making his submission, I haven't actually added that to my statement. So very quickly, my full name is Mark James Tipper, and I'm currently engaged as Senior Environmental Advisor by Christchurch City Council. Now, I should mention, I know Christchurch City Council is a submitter in this process. I'm not here representing Christchurch City Council. I'm here on behalf of 12th Night. But in my role as environmental advisor at Christchurch City Council, I've spent the last 3 years trying to explore ways and means for better managing coal tar. And by that I mean coal tar enroding, as opposed to coal tar, the raw byproduct of coal gasification. I'll speak to that a little more when I read my statement. So I've spent 3 years looking to improve the methods for managing coal tar, and in 2018 I wrote and had peer reviewed by members of Environment Canterbury and Christchurch City Council's Contaminated Sites team, and by an external third-party contaminated land expert, a guidance paper on how to manage coal tar enroding in Christchurch. which was quite well received by industry in terms of providing them some simple guidance on how to manage and dispose of coal tar. So I'll skip straight to my statement, I think, and take it from there. So, introduction. I should say this statement has been prepared by both Mr. English and myself. So, my name is Richard Spencer English. I have asked to be heard in support of my submission and have asked Mr. Mark James Tipper to represent me at the hearing, specifically in relation to my submissions on coal tar and the proposed changes to the Land and Water Regional Plan Rules 5.177 and 5.178. Mr. Tipper has prepared this statement and Mr. Tipper has agreed to be heard at the hearing in support of this statement. I endorse the content of this statement. Nature of coal tar roading materials. There can be confusion between the terms coal tar and coal tar roading materials. Coal tar is a byproduct of coal gasification, a process by which coal is converted into gas and coke. Coal tar was the residue at the end of the gasification process. In this raw form, coal tar is a semi-liquid industrial waste that includes a high mass of relatively volatile organic compounds. It is somewhat caustic, very toxic, and can cause severe acute or long-term human health harm. During the road manufacturing process in Christchurch up to the 1980s, coal tar was heated to a liquid state and then poured or sprayed onto the road surface or mixed with aggregate before placing on the road. As the coal tar-based road cured over the following weeks, months and years, the majority of the volatile component of the coal tar evaporated away, leaving a durable, solid surface. The coal tar that remained after curing was composed primarily of heavy mass polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, known as PAHs, that have low volatility and have very low solubility in water. For clarity, this statement and the submission made by Twelfth Night addresses only the management of roading materials containing cured coal tar. Unless otherwise stated, any use of the term coal tar in this statement refers to roading materials containing cured coal tar. Management of uncured coal tar industrial waste is outside the scope of this statement. So I'd just like to pause there and make sure we're clear on a clear delineation between coal tar roading materials as opposed to raw coal tar waste. Okay, thank you. Turning to the Land and Water Regional Plan, Condition 1 of Rule 5.177, the primary purpose of which is to protect groundwater quality, requires that the deposited material is only clean fill. Paragraph 11.12 of the Section 42A report confirms that the Land and Water Regional Plan definition of clean fill replicates the definition of clean fill material in the Ministry for the Environment document, A Guide to the Management of Clean Fills. Amongst other things, this definition precludes the deposition of hazardous substances. Coal tar contains PAHs, including benzoapyrene, which are recorded by Ministry for the Environment as hazardous substances. There is no proposal to change this condition as part of Plan Change 7. Therefore, the deposition of coal tar cannot currently be considered a controlled activity under Rule 5.177. However, at the very least, Environment Canterbury, ECAN, need to be consistent in their position on the risks that coal tar roading material poses to groundwater. Technical Memorandum Effects of Clean Fill Deposition on Groundwater Quality that supports the Section 42A report for this topic states that cured asphalt has low leachability, but states that coal tar poses a risk to groundwater because it contains PAHs. However, whilst PAHs and asphalts are very different compounds, coal tar comes from the mineral coal and asphalt is an oil-based hydrocarbon, they both have very low leachability. This discrepancy of intent is repeated in the Section 42A report at paragraph 11.26 of the report states in relation to concrete slurries, coal tar and hydro-excavated waste, and I quote here, as described in the supporting technical memorandum, effects of clean fill deposition on the groundwater quality, these materials can leach and impact groundwater quality. Yet paragraph 11.29 of the section 42A report states, coal tar is very toxic to environmental organisms, including humans, whereas aged coal tar bound to other waste, e.g. roading waste, is stable. I believe this discrepancy stems from a confusion between raw coal tar, the fresh byproduct of coal gasification, which is a liquid at room temperature, and the material that was used 40 or more years ago to surface roads in Christchurch. Therefore, whilst I agree that concrete slurries and hydro-excavated waste can leach and consequently pose a risk to groundwater quality, coal tar found in roading materials is hydrophobic, does not dissolve in water, and therefore will not leach PAHs that might contaminate groundwater. Paragraph 11.23 of the Section 42A report states that I note that PC7 provisions give effect to the RMA and are effects-based. In particular, they address effects on groundwater quality. Insufficient evidence on the leachability of coal tar has been provided to support a position that the proposed exclusion of coal tar is effects-based. It could also be argued that the risks to groundwater described in paragraphs 11.21 and 11.22 of the Section 42A report are the result of the initial excavation rather than the subsequent deposition of materials, especially those that meet the definition of clean fill materials. I have seen many laboratory reports that support the position that coal tar roading material does not leach, and I have not seen any evidence to the contrary. I therefore agree with the author of the Section 42A report's conclusion in paragraph 11.29. For the purposes of this discussion, coal tar roading material is stable and therefore does not pose a threat to local aquifers. ECAN should confirm this position on coal tar leachability, as it will fundamentally affect how applications for depositing coal tar containing roading material will be considered under the Land and Water Regional Plan, whether the application be for a controlled activity or a restricted discretionary activity. Other environmental and cost considerations. Although asbestos is a hazardous substance that can be harmful to humans, in late December 2017, ECAN granted consent for Fulton Hogan to deposit asbestos as backfill material in a quarry near Templeton on the outskirts of Christchurch. Once buried, the material was considered not to be a threat to human health. A further part of the reasoning behind granting the consent states, formerly, asbestos-containing material has been transported to Cape Valley landfill, taking up valuable space in a municipal landfill or transported to Otago for disposal. Provision of a safely managed fill option closer to Christchurch will result in significant cost saving and reduced need for transport of asbestos-containing material by road. And I'll just make the note that that quote comes from ECAN's own website. In addition to these points, I would add that disposing material to these distant facilities is costly in terms of carbon footprint. The same logic can be applied to enabling local deposition of coal tar roading material along with other roading asphalt layers. Currently, Cape Valley landfill and the Green Island facility near Dunedin are the only landfills authorised to accept all types of coal tar. The ability to apply for a consent to deposit coal tar containing roading materials at a local facility would far better achieve the purpose and principles of Part 2 of the RMA than continued reliance on the existing, more costly landfill options. Summary and conclusion. The potential quantum of road construction materials containing coal tar in Christchurch is significant. Disposal to municipal landfill is both monetarily and environmentally extremely costly in comparison to disposal into local lower classification fills. Both I and the Section 42A officers agree that coal tar in roading materials is stable and is therefore unlikely to leach or pose a risk to groundwater.
Well, Mr. Tipper, thank you very much for preparing that for us and for presenting it this afternoon. There may be some questions for you. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions?
Yeah, just so I understand, the concern is, well, you confirm whether or not this is the concern. It's the reference to coal tar in condition 5 of Rule 5177. Is that the concern?
That's essentially the concern, yes. So just to expand on that a little, if I may, is excluding coal tar from clean fills in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion. I should point out this is one of only 2 points where Mr. English and I differ slightly in our opinions on deposition of coal tar to a clean fill.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, Mr. English is of a mind that coal tar in roading materials has been deposited into clean fills in Christchurch area for decades. And he's right in that opinion. He's also right in his conclusions that there is no evidence of PAHs from coal tar being found in groundwater around the Christchurch area. And I can't help but agree with that as well. I personally, though, I'm aware that Ministry for the Environment has a waste list of materials that cannot be deposited in a clean fill, and on that list is a type of product that refers to coal tar as a byproduct, as a waste product of the coal gasification process. So Ministry for Environment has established a preclusion on including coal tar in clean fills, and I don't propose to argue with that at all. So that's the difference. But the key point of excluding coal tar is that in Environment Canterbury submissions, they don't support the exclusion with any science, and I'm concerned that Mr. English and I are both concerned that there's a misapprehension or misconception at Environment Canterbury about the risks that coal tar eroding poses to groundwater aquifers. Now, as I say, all the science I've ever seen, and Mr. English has ever seen, and the experts I've consulted with have ever seen, support that coal tar from roading does not leach. Coal tar as a raw waste product is a very different beast and is far less stable and is an environmental risk. But coal tar and roading, they're entirely separate types of material.
So just to be clear then, you're not asking us to remove coal tar from condition 4 of Rule 5177?
I am not, Mr. Tipper is not,
Yeah.
12th Night and Mr. English is.
Right.
What we both agree on, though, is that Environment Canterbury haven't used science to support their position.
Sure.
And that it would be good for Environment Canterbury, for the sake of all applications that will be made either under 5.177 or 5.178, to deposit coal tar in a clean fill or a landfill.
Yeah.
Be made under the shared knowledge that coal tar eroding materials does not leach and does not pose a threat to groundwater quality, which in Environment Canterbury's submission and Section 42A report and the supporting technical document, there is confusion about that position.
Okay, putting that to one side, I'm still struggling to understand the concern. Should you not meet the conditions of Rule 5177, you simply default to the next Rule 5178, which is a restricted discretionary activity. So you need a consent in either case. You never default to anything worse than restricted discretionary, so I'm struggling to identify any kind of mischief that requires a significant amendment.
And that's completely reasonable, absolutely. I should say, in my role as Environmental Advisor at Council, I'm aware that a number of consent applications have been lodged recently, and I'm aware there's currently 2 in application with ECAN to landfill coal tar, and both those applications have been supported by a great weight of information about the extraordinarily low risk that coal tar eroding material poses to groundwater, and yet both those applications have met a bit of a dead end at Environment Canterbury. Environment Canterbury appear to have no evidence, scientific evidence or data to counter the evidence provided by those applicants that coal tar doesn't leach, and yet there seems to be a feeling amongst some at ECAN that they've heard a rumour or a colleague might have overheard or might have seen that pHs have been found in groundwater, and so those applications have come to a bit of a dead end. Environment Canterbury appear to be asking for more information, but are unsure of what more information can be provided other than the weight of evidence that's already been given to them. So that essentially is where our concern lies, is that if Environment Canterbury don't take on board and recognise the lack of risk that coal tar poses to groundwater and accept the overwhelming weight of scientific evidence and are unable to provide any evidence to the contrary, that applications to dispose of coal tar in a very cost-effective, very environmentally beneficial local landfill close to Christchurch in an area that won't pose a risk to groundwater will be stymied and may not be granted.
Okay, well, given your advice to us earlier on that you personally don't recommend removing coal tar from condition 4, and your concession that bouncing to restricted discretionary, well, I'm reading into your response that that's not an overly onerous position. I think those concerns are best resolved through the applicants taking that process further to the Environment Court or wherever they want to go to argue the actual evidence. Okay, so no further questions, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Solomon, do you have anything you'd like to ask Mr. Tittar?
No. So I'm more clear on what the positions are.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So that our particular role, Mr. Tittar, as you know, I'm sure, is to make recommendations to the council, the regional council, on improvements to the plan change 7. We're not in the position of reprimanding them for unscientific or regrettable behaviour. We have nothing to do with how they behave. We only have to do with the contents of their plan. You understand that, don't you?
I do, Chairman.
Now, having read the original submission, having had the benefit of the evidence that Mr. English put in and that is unable to present personally, but you presented on his behalf, and having had the benefit of the statement that you have prepared and presented to us today, we'll now have to consider whether, if anything, there's any improvements in this respect that we can recommend to the council. In the meantime, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for preparing your statement. Would you leave the text of it with the hearing manager for us, please? And thank you for your attendance.
Thank you very much for your time, Commissioners. Chairman.
So, Ms. Fernando, am I right in thinking that that completes the business before the panel for this hearing week?
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner Shepherd.
So that the hearing's now adjourned till Monday fortnight at Timaru, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Very well. Thanks to all who've taken part this week.